Poor Pelly.
Yeah. Jake.
How are you, buddy?
Good. How are you doing?
So good. So happy to have you at the bunker.
Good to be here. This place is amazing.
Isn't it the coolest?
So cool.
Honestly, when I see a place like this, reminds me, I've said telling like the guys here, like CBGBs and all those cool clubs that music was like literally bred out of.
I've been to CBGBs. I think this is cooler.
Really?
Oh, man.
You saw it here, folks. Bunker's cooler than CBGBs. Pelly, they're like thinking about this interview. I've thought of so many things to ask you, and so many things I wanted to say, but I'm just going to start. And I want to start it because I feel like it's important, even though it's cliche. Where did you start? How did music start for you? You know, when was that pivotal point that brought you into kind of the world?
I was always into music since I was a little kid. I used to back in those days, I think it was like the top 6 at 6 on like Chum FM or something. It was like, and it was the hits. It would be like, I don't know, whatever was the hits back in those days. Yeah. And I remember recording them on Sunday nights and stuff. And then it was the Sunday Funnies. And then it was Theater of the Mind, which was like shows. And I used to tape all that stuff on my cassette tapes on my stereo in my room going to bed. I was always into music. My one older brother, all my family was always into music, but my one older brother was a guitar player. My brother Dan, and he played for quite a few years, and I used to just go down in the basement and listen to him play. I'd lie on the bed while he was playing, and I'd just have my eyes closed listening to him for hours. And he'd go to put the guitar down, and I'd be like, don't stop playing. And he'd be like, oh, I thought you were asleep. And then after he was playing for 5 years, I finally cornered him one day and was like, teach me some chords. And so he got me started.
What was the next step? So you a lot of kids, you say you get into, I don't know, you find the Beatles or you find whoever it is that gets you into it. Who was that pivotal?
Well, I remember at that point, it was I was a skate punk kid. I was listening to Dead Kennedys, Forgotten Rebels, good Canadian punk band. And I remember when he started letting me use his acoustic guitar to learn. I remember him saying this will change what you're doing. This is going to change. And I was like, no. And it did. So I grew up listening to, we had a camper van. I was the youngest of 5. We were always on hockey tournaments and stuff or baseball tournaments. We were always in that camper van for my dad's teams, for my brother's teams, whatever. And when we were doing those travels, it was always the best of Neil Young, Gordon Lightfoot. And because I was the youngest, there was a bunk on top. That's where I'd be. No seatbelts back in those days. And all my brother and sister would be down on the bottom and my parents driving. And I just listen to those stories. And then, you grow up, you get a skateboard, you start listening to punk rock. And then you start playing acoustic guitar. And suddenly, I remember way back in those days, it's just being there's a similarity here. Many years later, you hear that old story, country music is 3 chords and the truth. And I remember being well, punk rock and country music is the same thing, man. 3 chords and the truth. The best ones are that's what it is.
So true.
And so that's kind of where I came from. That's how it happened.
So when I look at because I've always looked at you, and the best thing I could compare you to, and I mean this in all the compliments, is John Prine, where I go when I look
I'll take that.
But honestly, when I look at you play, it's your songs have comedic elements to them, right? But then there's songs of yours where I have literally wept listening to them, when the morning comes and songs like that. So I guess that's the thing where you can turn something terrible like John Prine did or all these artists, turn something terrible and make them joyful. And I think that's the thing with country music. So I think it was a perfect example of how you described it because, man, your right hand is like a hammer when you play the guitar. When did you start writing? When did you begin that process of just creating?
I can tell you that specifically. My friend Lori Carroll at the time, who later became Lori Clark.
Yeah.
Darren's wife. She was a good friend of mine from high school. I knew who Darren was. Mostly, he was a goaltender for my brother's hockey team, and Laurie talked about him nonstop. And then, so I kind of got to know him through Laurie more than through my brothers. I just knew who he was for years. And then one night, we were in Laurie's backyard. We were there, and Darren was sitting around the campfire, and he was playing for a couple of hours, but he was playing songs he wrote. And I was like, what the? Like, I didn't know this was a thing. They were so good. And that inspired me to start trying to write for myself. And once I started writing songs, Laurie told me to go down and play Bensley's open stage. Yeah. And I went down there, and like Clark would be there, Blasco would be there. I remember when I first started playing, it was the Hare and the Hound, Bensley's Sunday night open mic. And Blasco, Clarky would be there, and they were so good. And I remember being like, man, here's my goal. I want those guys to like what I'm doing. If those guys like what I'm doing, then I'm good. Yeah. Like that makes me happy. Like that was my goal. And I ended up being in a band with those guys and traveling around the country for like a few years.
But isn't that a funny thing where it's like so many people will go like, well, I want to be Madison Square Garden front and center, but
that's how I wrote that. I have a song called The Havelock Jamboree, and that's how that came about. Because back in those days, I was writing songs, and one of the girls that I worked with was like, "I just know one day I'm gonna turn on Much Music and I'm gonna see you there." And I was like, well, I disagree. Number one, but number two, like that, nah. And she's like, "Well, what are you doing it for?" I was like, "Well, I'd like to play the Havelock Jamboree one day." And so I wrote the song Havelock Jamboree, and I got to play that song at the Havelock Jamboree, man, with Brad and Clarky. Yeah.
But I look at those things and like how perfect that is. Where it's like, because you've been all around Canada, like multiple times. Yeah. Both of us, we've always reveled in our love for like Stompin Tom. Yeah. Stompin Tom Connors, and the love of like Jim, who's our audio guy here, has Stompin Tom tattooed on his arm. Like that's a love. But when I associate you with music, I associate you with travel as well. So you've been across this country with multiple bands, multiple people. Yeah. When was that to you? It's just like, fuck it. I'm just taking off across this country.
That's how the name Poor Pelly came about. It was because it was like all my friends at that age were getting married, buying houses and having kids. And that time I just wasn't for it. Like I just want to play music. And it was my friend who named me that because they invited me over to the place, and I was like, look, I don't have any money, so I don't want to go to a bar. And he's like, no, we're going to hang it in the garage. Come on over, bring your guitar. So I was like, oh, all right, you sure? And like, we're not going anywhere? No. So I showed up with my guitar, playing in the garage, and all of a sudden the girls show up, and they're all dressed to the nines. They're like, when are we calling a cab? And I remember looking at my buddy, I'm like, you son of a bitch.
How could you?
And he was like, that's how I got you here, man. And the girls were like, well, why don't you want to go? And I'm like, because I don't have any money. But my buddy broke in, my buddy Ozzy, and he's like, because he's poor fucking Pelly. Because that guitar, I mean, he's lost girlfriends and jobs, and like it's all because that fucking guitar. And that night I went home when they went to the bar. I went home and I wrote the song called Poor Pelly on his little guitar. And from that point on, it was Poor Pelly.
And you know what? I love that so much because it's like, I mean, we've all been there as musicians and artists, and it's just like, this is what I love to do.
I had to force myself to walk away from it. I had to do something else. Yeah. And, kids and a house and stuff like that. And that was the hardest times of my life. And then, there was other great things going on, kids and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course.
But as time went on, it just came back. When it came back like strong. And now I'm like, do I really need that job? Like, can I do this again?
You always have an escape clause.
Can I do this again?
Yeah.
But so, I don't know how I'd pay for my bills, but I'm still trying to figure. My mind never stops thinking about it.
It's a cruel mistress. When you write, how do you write? Is it like, because I asked a lot of people, like, does it just pour out of you? Is it just literally you're just driving down the road, tapping your thumbs on the steering wheel?
It changes all the time. There's a little bit of all of it. If I knew the exact answer, I'd have a lot more. But 80% of the time, I'm playing guitar and a melody comes out and I just start shouting gibberish over it. Like for example, one of the songs I played tonight, the When the Morning Comes.
Yeah.
I picked up the guitar, and the first thing that came out was like, I'll be in trouble when the morning comes, when the light shines on what I've done. I'm like, well, and the song was done in like 5 minutes. And then other times I've got a melody and I'll just shout out gibberish, record it on your phone or whatever. And then usually something pops out, usually in the chorus, where I'm like, oh, that's a good idea for a song. And then I base it off that. But then there's other ones like Binomials one, where I got the idea, and that was one I wrote all the words before I ever picked up a guitar. And then I picked up a guitar and tried to find a melody in that, which is a whole different thing. So it changes, but you just hope that one of those ways works. It keeps happening at somehow.
But that's such an awesome thing about songwriting, where it's like, sometimes it just happens. You know what I mean? And I mean, I think it was, Bob Dylan wrote "Blowing in the Wind" in like 5 seconds or whatever it was.
I picked up the guitar last night to figure out what songs I would want to do. And I picked it up and I started writing a new song. And I worked on that and then I was like, oh shit, I got to go to bed. And I never practiced any songs. I like what Mitch Hedberg said. Mitch Hedberg said, like, I'm a comedian. And so I always walk around with a pen and a note paper. Yeah. And so if I think of something, I have it to write it down, because if I don't, it's gone. And that's true, as you probably know as a songwriter. He's like, but then when I'm in my hotel room and I'm in bed and I'm comfortable and I realize I left the pen and the paper on the other side of the room, I got to convince myself that what I thought of wasn't funny. I think that's amazing.
It's perfect. Yeah. That's so true. Well, man, listen, I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Thank you for having me, man.
This was a pleasure for all of us.
This place is amazing. This is awesome what you guys are doing. North Brothers, shout out. Magoo, this place is insane. I love it.
Poor Pelly, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get a big round of applause for my good friend.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me, man.
Appreciate it. Beauty.